Have you ever sat in that heavy silence at a family dinner? Here on The Story Within, we retell those moments honest every day, sometimes controversial. Every story is a mirror. Subscribe, join the conversation, and maybe find a little healing. I heard it before I understood it, a breath pressed into words. He's gone. We have to leave now. The sentence slipped through the constant hum of Chicago's Terminal 1, a quiet threat against the clatter of roller bags and the soft ping of boarding calls. I turned to my granddaughter. Lila's fingers tightened around mine with a strength that didn't match her 7 years. Her eyes weren't on the plane we'd just waved at. They were fixed somewhere behind my shoulder. "What are you talking about, honey?" I asked, keeping my voice light as if we were still admiring the jet that had swallowed her father moments ago. Daniel's flight had pushed back from the gate and was taxiing into the cold, glassy March light. "Your dad will be back from London in a week." She didn't blink. "Gran, we need to go now." 68 years of living had taught me to listen when a child's certainty sounded like that. It wasn't drama. It was a clear bell. I coughed, turned as though checking the departures board, and let my eyes wander, concessions, a kiosk, a security lane, already snaking. Then I saw them, 2 men by the secondary checkpoint, not together, not apart, both in dark jackets, a shade too formal for a domestic morning flight. Their gaze moved the way trained people's gaze moves, never landing long yet, never losing a bead. "Okay," I said to Lila, adjusting the strap of my handbag, as though it had been digging into my shoulder for hours. "Let's go get the car before the garage fills up." We walked. Not briskly, brisk triggers attention, but with the purposeful gait of people eager to beat a parking surcharge. Lila hugged her stuffed fox copper against her coat, the toy's fur worn to a warm, flattened sheen along the back. The escalator dipped us toward level B of the garage, where the air smelled of antifreeze and wet cement. I kept my head forward and used every reflective surface as a mirror, a minivan's polished panel, a window's faint glare, the chrome lip of a service door. The men from upstairs did not follow us immediately, but a gray SUV rolled by slowly in a lane across the driver, speaking into his sleeve, as if rubbing his chin. "Are they after us?" Lila asked, without looking up, her voice a paper whisper. "How did you notice them?" I said. "Daddy told me to watch for men who didn't look at anything for long," she said. Copper tucked under her chin. "He said if I see them, I should tell you we have to go right away." The chill that moved through me had nothing to do with the garage draft. Daniel was practical and private, a numbers man at North Star Capital who preferred spreadsheets to drama. He did not plant fears in children. If he'd prepared his daughter for this moment, he'd done it because something had already slipped beyond ordinary. I unlocked the sedan, lifted Lila into her booster, and buckled her in. By the time I sat behind the wheel and glanced into the mirror, the elevator had opened on the far side of the level. The 2 men from the terminal stepped into view. They didn't speed up. They didn't wave anyone over. They simply adjusted their positions and watched. The engine turned over. I eased out, choosing a lane that kept concrete pillars between their sightline and our license plate. At the pay booth, I slid cash into the slot, ignoring the card reader's inviting green light. The barrier rose. We joined the exit snake and emerged into day. Instead of angling toward the expressway home to Oak Park, I slipped left, following signage toward downtown. The John F. Kennedy ramp flashed past, and I let it go, watching the rear view. 3 cars back, the gray SUV from the garage vanished behind a bus, then reappeared. Too steady to be noon errands. Too patient to be coincidence. "Gran," Leela said, "Daddy told me something else." I kept my tone easy. "What's that?" "If the bad men came, I should give you copper." Daddy said copper has a secret. I glanced at the fox. The seam along its spine, matted and repaired years ago, looked like any grandmother's careful mending. But I knew my own stitches. Those weren't mine. "We'll check when we're somewhere quiet," I said. "For now, keep him close." Traffic thickened as we dipped under the river. Towers rose like teeth against a pale sky. Chicago doesn't try to be gentle with you. It simply gives you room to decide. Lila's face, reflected in the passenger window, was the exact mix of Daniel and the little boy he once was when things went suddenly serious. The SUV maintained distance, then changed lanes when I changed lanes. Street by street, I laced us into the loop, Randolph, Wabash, Lower Michigan, up again into a spill of cabs and buses. At a hotel that still pretended to be anonymous, despite a marquee of brushed brass, I signaled late and drifted into the drive, then slid down into the garage concrete, closing around us like a hand. We coasted to the lowest level, where a support column would hide us from the entry camera for a minute. I killed the engine. The silence clanged. "Let me see copper," I said. Lila surrendered the fox without fuss. Her trust punched a small hole in me that I patched with habit. Do the next right thing, then the next. I felt the seam with my thumbnail, found the place where thread met thread, at an angle that only made sense if your goal wasn't durability but disguise. I teased the joint apart carefully until the cloth gave way to a hidden pocket. Inside was a small black USB drive and a folded card, Daniel's tidy block print compressed into tight lines. My hands were steady until I saw my name. Mom, if you are reading this, I didn't have time to warn you the way I wanted. Please trust what I've written. Don't go home. Don't use your phone or cards. Go to the main library downtown. History aisle K. Find American Mornings by Klein. Dad kept a copy in his study. Page 211. There's a key. The USB is encrypted. Password is a phrase you made me memorize when I was 12, the one about growing carrots and not bragging. Do not call me. I will reach out through a secure channel when I can. Until then, trust only one journalist, Nora Kent at the Chicago Ledger. I'm sorry. Keep Lila safe. D. The breath I'd been holding returned as something heavier. I tucked the card and drive into the inner pocket of my bag and smoothed Copper's back, resealing the seam with 3 small stitches from the tiny sewing kit I'd learned to carry when my husband was still alive and losing buttons at the worst moments. Did Daddy write it? Lila asked. He did, I said. He wants us to be brave and very careful. A car turned down the ramp above us. Its tires hissed along painted arrows. Somewhere near the entrance, an engine idled too long for a drop-off. The gray SUV could circle the block twice and still be punctual. I started the sedan and edged out from behind the pillar. We took a different ramp up and out, not the one we'd used to enter, so that whoever expected us at one exit would find the other easiest to watch. On the street, I let a line of delivery vans swallow us. We floated inside their wake, one anonymous box among many. At a light, a pair of teenagers wheeled past on fixed-gear bikes, their breath puffing in quick ghosts. Lila watched them with the absorbed interest of a child who believes the world is a series of small fascinations. I watched the mirror. The SUV slid through cross-traffic, then stalled at a yellow and had to brake. Not enough to free us, but enough to stretch the rubber band. Are we in trouble? Lila asked, still studying the boys on bikes. We're in a situation your dad asked us to handle, I said. And we're doing that. She nodded like I'd told her the rules to a board game and she was already winning. Then what's next? We stick to cash, I said. We stay where people expect strangers, and we head for a place that's quieter than this one. What about the secret book, she said, patting Copper's head as if he'd offered the suggestion. We'll go there, I said, choosing a route in my head that lived in the cracks of maps. A public garage 3 blocks from the library where attendants took cash with a shrug. A pedestrian alley that turned left when streets went straight. A lobby that smelled of paper and polish and kept more cameras than security guards. We just don't walk in a straight line to it. We crossed the river again in a knot of traffic. A bus blocked the view behind us for an entire block. When it peeled away, the gray SUV was gone. My hands didn't loosen on the wheel. People like that didn't give up. They adjusted. Gran, yes. Can Copper stay with me even though he had a secret? He absolutely can, I said. He did his job. Her mouth tucked into the small, fierce smile that shows up in our family when something hard has to be done and we do it anyway. I felt my own face answer. I cut across 2 lanes and slid into a municipal lot that had a habit of swallowing vehicles and returning them later as if nothing had happened. I paid another stack of bills to a clerk who looked bored by the very concept of receipts. We parked in a slot marked by a half-faded numeral and stepped out into a city whose winter light made everything look more honest than it usually did. I pulled a baseball cap from the emergency kit in the trunk and tucked my hair beneath it. Lila swapped her bright scarf for a plain one. Small changes enough to slow a glance. I took her hand. Ready? I asked. She squeezed twice. Our old code. Yes, yes. We stepped into the elevator and the doors slid closed on the world we just left behind. The elevator sighed open onto streetlight in an ordinary Thursday. We crossed the lobby without touching anything we didn't need to then folded ourselves into the city. A wind that had traveled the length of the river cut down the block, tugging at Lila's plain scarf. I adjusted my cap and set a pace that matched the crowd. 3 turns and a block of scaffolding later, the main library rose ahead, stone glass and the comfort of people who had come for quiet. The guard at the door glanced at us and glanced away. Inside, warmth gathered in the atrium like breath held in a cupped hand. Lila's shoulders loosened. Mine did not. Remember, I said softly, we're visitors today. We touch spines, not screens. She nodded. We took the stairs, less cameras than the elevators, and moved through the second-floor balustrade to a corridor hung with portraits of aldermen from another century. The history reading room opened like a chapel, long tables, green lamps, a polished hush. A sign pointed to K American and Social. Aisle K had the faint, clean smell of cloth bindings and old glue. I let my fingers trail above the call numbers without touching counting shelves to the catalog's logic. Klein would sit with K378. American Mornings was there, dust jacket, sun-faded to the color of tea, left too long in the pot. Daniel's note had said page 211. I pulled the book, its weight familiar to a hand that had lifted textbooks for 4 decades, and carried it to a corner table. Lila perched across from me, Copper on her lap, like a small conspiratorial animal. I opened at 211. Whoever had slipped an envelope into this copy had known to choose a section dense with photographs, The added thickness made sense there. Brown paper thin as an old letter. I slid it into my bag before anyone could notice the interruption in the pages, then returned the book to its place and steered us toward the children's alcove. At a low shelf lined with picture books about trains, I crouched beside Lila as if we were reading. Behind the cover of a hardcover about a stubborn caboose, I unfolded the envelope. A key nestled against a card the size of a library slip, the metal stamped with HB 426. On the card, Daniel's print again compressed to a whisper. Harbor and Lake Trust Branch on Dearborn. Box 426. They'll ask for ID and a code. Code equals Dad's birthday, plus Lila's. Cash only for transport today. When you reach the box backup drive notes and funds. Give everything to Nora Kent at the ledger. She knows to expect a courier with a fox. Password for the files is the garden phrase. Destroy this card. D. Garden phrase. The one I'd taught a serious boy at 12 when his friend had bragged about a first tomato. Grow the carrot, don't praise the dirt. The kind of sentence that hid in memory because it sounded like a riddle and so became a key. I folded the card again and again until it made a square no bigger than a coin, then opened my sewing kit. Lila watched with intense gravity as I slipped the paper into the lining of my bag, between canvas and leather, a place a quick hand would not find. I palmed the key and slid it under the elastic strap of a notebook. The empty envelope went into a pocket in my coat, later separate trash cans. A man in a navy suit appeared at the end of the aisle, thumb flicking a soft click along a wristband as he turned his head in measured increments. He looked past us the way people look past furniture. He did not take a book. He did not sit. Gran Lila breathed. Reading voices, I said lightly. I picked 2 board books at random and stood placing them on the reshelving cart. Let's find the trains that make noises. We walked out of aisle K like any other pair who had just found the wrong shelf. Down a short corridor, a red exit sign burned above a door marked for staff. Past that, the stairwell door with a push bar that would set off an alarm. Not yet. I chose the service elevator instead, the one with dented stainless steel and a list of floors printed on a temporary paper sign, and pressed B for the loading dock. In the mirror of the elevator's interior, Lila adjusted Copper's ears. I smoothed my face into the expression of a woman who is exactly where she should be. The doors opened to a rectangle of concrete stacked pallets and a clerk rolling a cart of returned books into a back hallway. I nodded, kept moving, took the side door marked deliveries that emptied into a narrow lane where a truck idled with 2 men carrying boxes. The cold stepped into our coats and stayed. On Dearborn, the branch of Harbor and Lake Trust gave itself a polished, smaller face. The lobby was marble in miniature, the vault door visible through tucked glass. No posters, no balloons, no temptation to open an account. This was a place for people who already had reasons to be here. At the information desk, a woman with neat hair and a nameplate that said A. Piers looked up with the tidy attentiveness of someone who likes lists. Good morning. Safe deposit box, please, I said. Number 426. Your identification, she asked. I handed over my license. She typed with a speed that did not look like worry. Thank you, Mrs. Lane. The name on the license still felt like a dress I'd owned for years. This box requires an access code as well. I spoke the numbers quietly, the combination of 2 dates I could say in my sleep. She nodded, picked up a phone, and said, Box 426, please. We sat on a leather bench for 3 minutes that elongated like a shadow. Lila swung her feet without touching the floor. Her eyes counted patterns in the carpet to stop them from counting doors. A man in a gray suit strode into the lobby, paused, and asked a question about wire transfers. He did not look at us. A bank officer named Mr. West guided us through a secure door to the vault, its round vaultness excessive and somehow reassuring. You can use this room, he said, indicating a small space with a table. We did as instructed. My key, his key, the long metal drawer, the weight of a slim suitcase placed on the table. He left us alone. Inside an unmarked envelope, a phone still in its clear plastic, a bundle of cash that made a soft, practical weight, and a thumb drive labeled only with a tiny strip of blue tape. The envelope contained a single typed page and a second smaller key. Nora, authorize release. Courier will present the Fox, D. Beneath Daniel's signature, the one I'd watched him practice as a teenager when his handwriting kept turning into math. The smaller key was stamped S18. Lila's hand lay flat on Copper's back as if keeping him from leaping. Is this the treasure? It's what we came for, I said. I packed the cash into 2 places, not all eggs in one basket, half beneath the lining of my handbag, half in a zippered pouch inside Lila's coat. The phone stayed in its wrap. I did not turn it on. The drives went into separate pockets as well. The authorization letter folded into the pocket of a file folder I borrowed from the bottom of the drawer. There were always extra folders in places like this, in case someone wanted to feel orderly. When we rang the bell, Mr. West reappeared with a smile that did not dig too deeply into curiosity. He locked the drawer back into the wall. Thank you for banking with Harbor and Lake, he said, the script worn smooth with use, and led us back to the lobby. Outside, the wind had picked up. The sky had that white glare that flattens edges and makes everything a little too bright. I tested the air the way I used to test a classroom 5 minutes before the bell listened for the one note that doesn't belong. Everything hummed at the same pitch. The Chicago Ledger sat 15 blocks away, a building that tried to look both serious and modern and accomplished both only because your eye wanted it to. We didn't walk the whole way. I hailed a cab 2 blocks down, the kind that still took cash without commentary. The driver, a man with kind eyes behind thick glasses, adjusted his mirror so that he could see Lila and said, "Where to, ma'am?" "Ledger Building on Wabash," I answered. "If you can take State up and cut over on Lake." "You got it." He put on the turn signal in a way that suggested he'd learned to drive where turn signals were treated like prayers rather than promises. Inside, the cab heat blew too hot. Lila leaned against my arm, not sleepy, just sheltering. Copper rested in her lap with his stitched spine smooth. I watched the side mirrors. A dark sedan slid past us, then kept going. The gray SUV did not appear. The Ledger's lobby held a security desk with a man who had read too many memos. I stepped up and said Miriam Lane to see Nora Kent. He checked the screen. "Do you have an appointment, Ms. Lane?" "No, I don't see anything on the calendar." He picked up the phone, then paused as it rang on his desk instead of his ear. He listened, nodded, and said, "18th floor suite, 1806. Ms. Kent says to send you right up." The elevator smoothed us to the newsroom. A front desk attendant escorted us along a corridor lined with framed front pages, favorite victories under glass. Although I hadn't met her, I knew Nora Kent by the posture of someone who runs toward difficult things. Mid-40s, sleeves rolled once, hair pulled back, not to look young, but to keep it out of the story. "Miriam," she said, offering a hand that had ink in its memory. "And you must be Lila?" Lila managed a small smile. Nora crouched a fraction to meet her eyes, not to patronize, simply to create a straight line between them. "Copper," Nora said to the Fox. "Glad you could make it." She gestured us into her office, glass-walled, but with blinds half closed, so only the shape of the newsroom moved outside. She set a juice box on the table, a habit that suggested she had nieces, or had covered enough school board meetings to be prepared for children in strange places, then turned back to me. "How much time do you have?" she asked. "As long as the elevator keeps working," I said. "Understood." She accepted the envelope and the drive with a seriousness that did not dramatize the moment. She slid the drive into a dock connected to a laptop that wasn't the laptop on her desk. The air gap, a physical understanding of the difference between story and weapon. The screen asked for a password. I typed the garden phrase. Nora glanced at the keyboard and then at me. "That's good." The folder unfolded into a neat, ruined spreadsheets with foreign subsidiaries nested like matryoshka dolls. Emails with politeness laid over wrought memoranda, in which euphemisms did work like ropes. Nora looked at a handful with a speed-born not of impatience, but of a practiced eye for which piece will hold and which will slide. She opened a transcript labeled "Sourcing Protocol," read 3 lines, and exhaled softly, which in her dialect likely meant "there's meat." She didn't ask me to explain all of it. She asked me 3 questions I could answer: how I had received the drive, who I had spoken to, whether any copies had been left anywhere else. The answers were simple, from a toy fox to a book to a box. No one but the bank, and yes, one other drive in my coat. She nodded. A knock at the glass. Nora's assistant, a young woman whose tote bag had the slouch of someone who could carry 5 lives at once, leaned in. "2 men downstairs," she said evenly. "They're asking for access to legal. Credentials say Financial Crimes Task Force." A beat. "But their badge numbers are a digit format we don't recognize, and they didn't sign the visitor sheet." Nora's expression didn't change, only her eyes sharpened. She closed the blinds the rest of the way and turned to the wall phone. "Send them to Conference C in 10, she said calmly. "Tell them legal is in a meeting, and call our security office to walk a loop." She powered down the air-gapped machine, lifted the drive, and pressed it back into my hand. "I'll work from copies," she said, as if we were discussing a recipe card I didn't want to lose. She picked up the typed authorization from Daniel, scanned it, and slipped the original into a manila folder with "Kent Hold" in block letters. "Take the service corridor," she told her assistant. "Freight elevator to the loading dock. I'll meet our guests. If anyone asks, they were never here." Nora knelt again by Lila. "You did something very hard today," she said. "Not soft, not grand, just exact. Thank you." Lila nodded with solemnity that had nothing of stage about it. She slid Copper into the crook of her arm and stood. The assistant led us down a back hall of copy paper and boxes of branded mugs, past a bulletin board speckled with maps and strings in a way that felt more practical than theatrical. The freight elevator smelled faintly of oil and a cleaner too citrus to be natural. It thumped once on the way down. The loading dock opened to a side street where delivery trucks gathered like cattle at a trough. The assistant pointed us toward a gate a block away with a simple "take care," then turned back already on her phone to a number labeled only with initials. We walked along the wall in the shadow of the building and out through the gate. The city's noise resumed unbothered. Taxis made a slow river along the curb. I raised my hand, one peeled from the line. "Anywhere particular," the driver said through the open window. "Farther than lunch," I answered, holding the door for Lila. We slid into the back seat. The door shut with the soft thump of a seal. I gave an intersection near the river that sold anonymity in the shape of buses and tourists, and the cab pulled away the street, lifting here and settling there, all of it moving at the human speed of a city, keeping its own counsel. The cab merged into the wider stream along Wabash, and the city absorbed us the way it absorbs everything. One more story no one asked to hear. Lila leaned her head against my side, copper tucked beneath her chin so his stitched spine didn't scratch her cheek. The driver, an older man with a Red Star's cap, softened by years, kept his eyes on the mirrors without making a show of it. "Anywhere after this?" he asked, voice low enough not to startle a child. "North," I said, "where the map thins out." He nodded like that made sense to him in a way that didn't require reasons. At a stoplight, he lifted his phone, glanced, and put it back down. "I'll get you to a place where cabs don't sit," he added. "From there we can find something with bigger wheels." He took a left, a right, another left, through a patchwork of neighborhoods that still smelled like dough and oil in the river when the wind shifted. Downtown fell behind as brick gave way to thinner streets. He didn't ask for a destination again. By the time we reached a freight diner pressed between a rail spur and a concrete plant, the afternoon had lowered itself into the space where lights begin to matter. Trucks breathed in the parking lot. The neon sign read "Marta's," some letters brighter than others. The driver parked where no one could drift behind his trunk. "Food," he said. "Coffee," I said, "and a sandwich for her." Inside, the air smelled of onions and pancakes regardless of the hour. The waitress called everyone hun and meant it. Lila devoured grilled cheese in precise half moons. I tried coffee that tasted like someone cared enough to keep the pot clean. The driver, his name was stitched on his jacket as A.L., stepped to the counter, spoke to the owner with a familiarity that had the rhythm of old favors. He returned with a slip of paper. "My cousin runs a furniture run to Traverse and back," he said. "He's 20 minutes out. He can take you most of the way for gas and a story." I began, then stopped because thank you was too small and because naming it could make it fragile. He shrugged in a way men do when they won't accept gratitude for doing something they would have done anyway. "We look out for kids with toys that have seen life," he said, nodding at Copper, "and grandmothers with good hats." Outside, the temperature had fallen 1 careful degree. We stood in the lee of a cinder block wall while a semi eased into the lot and settled with a sigh. The cab's door swung open. A barrel-chested man with gentle hands climbed down and grinned at Lila like she'd restored his faith in birds. "Name's Victor," he said. "Got room in the cab and no taste for talking if you don't." He hoisted our small bag as if it were the handle to a gate and helped Lila clamber up the metal steps. The truck's interior smelled of dry wool and winter road. Victor showed Lila the Bunka Castle, he called it, and secured Copper in a net pocket like a proper passenger. We thanked Al more times than good manners insisted, and he waved us away like we were embarrassing him. The miles north unspooled in a wide ribbon. Highway shouldered woods. Woods shouldered fields. Fields returned to woods. Victor drove with the economy of someone who didn't waste motion on proving he knew how. When Lila's questions about gauges about the purpose of the small fan pointed at Victor's shoulder ran out, he told her exactly one story about driving through a thunderhead that pulled lightning like thread from one side of the sky to the other. She fell asleep before he reached the part where his wipers gave up, and he drove by sound, the rain a drum he could read. I dozed and starts waking to check the mirror that wasn't mine, to check the road shoulder, the small glow of Lila's breath fogging the window. Each time Victor was exactly the same, steady eyes scanning, one hand resting on the wheel, as if testing the heartbeat of the machine. We crossed a county line, then another. Dusk slid into night without ceremony. Near 9, Victor turned off at a gas station that remembered a busier era. A hand-lettered sign in the window of the diner next door read "Kitchen Open." Inside, a woman with hair pinned up by 3 pencils sized us in a glance that included the weather. "Magda," she said, setting menus we didn't need on the table. "My brother's boy runs a pickup up toward Echo Ridge, not far from the lakes people brag about like they invented them." "We'll pay," I said. "City people always try to," she replied, unoffended. "Eat your soup." The soup was chicken and dill and warmth. By the time the bowls were dry, a gray pickup pulled in. The driver, a compact man whose face had collected more weather than years, came inside and tipped his hat toward Magda, toward Victor, toward us. "Elias," he said, "truck bed's clean, cab's warm, you choose." "Cab," I said, thinking of wind and Lila's sleeps. We thanked Victor the right way with eye contact and a promise to return his thermos whenever fate made that possible and climbed into Elias's pickup. He drove with the alertness of someone who knew every dip in a road shoulder and every mailbox that belonged to someone who'd wave. He and Magda traded jokes over a shortwave that felt like family doing the work of a net. The last 20 minutes were on a narrower road, pine pressed closer. When the lane turned to 2 ruts and then to 1, Elias killed his lights and rolled the final 50 yards by feel. Your place, he said at a break in the trees, and there it was, a cabin that looked as if it had grown from the stones beneath it. The lake below wore moonlight like a shawl. Caretaker checks this property, Elias added. Old-timer named Niles, honest enough to trust with the last piece of pie. We climbed out. The night's quiet rang. Elias set our bag on the porch and tipped his hat again. If you need a lift back to the world, Magda knows how to ring me, he said, and was gone before I could embarrass us both again with thanks. The key sat where Daniel's message said it would, under a flat stone with a rust-colored streak at the back step. Inside, dust had settled in the time between lives, but the bones of the place were sound. 2 rooms, a stove that preferred patience, a generator out back with enough gas to choose when light mattered. I found blankets, shook them, made 2 beds, as Lila blinked herself awake and then awake again at the sight of the lake. It smells like Christmas trees, she whispered, climbing into the smaller bed. It smells like sap and a clean cold, I said, tucking Copper under her arm. Sleep. She did the unself-conscious collapse of a child who'd stored fear in deep pockets and would empty them later. I sat by the small window with the generator off the moon enough. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of small statements, water adjusting to air, the slow rest of wood. When I turned the generator on long enough to boil water, I also turned on the small battery radio Elias had left on the shelf. Static, then a station. The voice had the tired competence of someone who'd lost his taste for adjectives. The shares of North Star Capital were halted in afternoon trading after unconfirmed reports of an impending investigative feature at the Chicago Ledger. North Star disputes any allegations of wrongdoing. Federal regulators declined comment. I clicked it lower and stood still long enough to feel my heart reset its pace. The phone from the bank stayed off. The drives stayed where I'd hidden them, one beneath the false bottom of a drawer, one in the pocket of my coat under the hook by the door. Morning met the water gently. Lila woke with a question already cued. "Can we look for birds?" she asked, brandishing a field guide that had outlived a few summers. "We can watch from this porch," I said, and handed her small binoculars with lenses that needed wiping. She made matter-of-fact notes in the margin of a paper bag I flattened into a list: loon kingfisher, something small and quick. Copper sat on the rail as if he'd grown into a fox that could balance. Around noon, the radio, the station I trusted now because it was stubborn, shifted register. The Ledger published a special report this morning detailing a multi-year pattern of illicit transfers through domestic and foreign subsidiaries, including transactions routed through humanitarian funds. Federal agents executed search warrants at North Star's Chicago headquarters, and sources say additional actions are underway. The Ledger declined to comment beyond confirming the authenticity of documents. I turned the volume down until it was a breath. Lila traced the outline of a chickadee with a fingertip and announced, satisfied, "This one wears a cap like yours." In the afternoon, a truck approached slowly enough to ask permission with its tires. A knock came that sounded like a neighbor, not a demand. The man on the porch was bent in a way that suggested old labor and willing knees. His cap read Niles and Sons Mate in sun-bleached thread. "Ms. Lane," he said. "Not a question. I keep this place standing between winters. Brought eggs, milk, bread that won't break your teeth. My wife made a stew that thinks too highly of itself." He set the bag on the table without looking around like a man taking inventory. "If anybody asks if anyone's up here," he added, "I find my hearing not what it used to be." He touched his cap, not quite a salute, and retreated to the truck that had the dignified exhaustion of working vehicles. I fed Lila stew that appreciated being warmed twice. She asked if the birds would like the crumbs, and I told her the birds could fend for themselves. Dark arrived with the discipline of woods. I checked locks out of habit and then out of something else. The radio offered fragments, names of executives, phrases like cooperating with authorities, the prickly neutrality of spokespeople. Close to midnight, the phone I'd left turned off on the table, lit its screen with a pulse. No ringtone, just a text threaded through a network that behaved like it had been asked politely. I powered it, read, and felt the room tilt a fraction back toward level. Published. Trading suspended. Federal warrants executed. Stay in place. A visitor in 3 days, late morning. Channel remains secure. N. I turned the screen face down to let the dark reclaim the room. Lila slept with one hand flung out and Copper anchored under the other. The lake wore the moon without complaint. Somewhere between the stove's last tick and the wind's small rearrangements among the pines, my shoulders discovered a way to rest that wasn't surrender. 3 mornings later, frost filigreed the porch rail as if someone had practiced handwriting in ice. I stood with coffee and the field guide Lila had claimed as hers. The lake kept its secrets. The phone on the table had stayed dark. At 10:06, tires whispered along the ruts and stopped out of sight. A voice I knew from a different season called my name. Miriam. Rachel stood at the tree line with a backpack and a face the wind had not forgiven. Lila's mother had always worn a competence that could read his distance. Today it looked like someone who had stopped choosing herself first. Lila was through the door before I could say her name. Mom. The word hit the clearing with a sound that turned the cold into air again. Rachel caught her knees soft to absorb the force arms around a body that refused to let go. She looked over Lila's hair at me. He reached you. Nora did, I said. We've kept to the plan he left. Rachel nodded. Good. Then we need to change it. Inside the stew pot warmed the stove again, patient with us. Lila set Copper at the center of the table as if he were entitled to a seat. Rachel accepted coffee like a medicine she trusted. There was a break-in at my place, she said, no decoration. 2 men gloves, a third outside on a phone. They didn't take anything worth anything. They took photographs of drawers. They looked for paper with feelings in it. Police. They wrote a report the way people write grocery lists when they already ate, she said. Daniel's friend inside the bureau called 2 hours later. Someone has been mapping family properties. This cabin sits in the tail of a spreadsheet. I folded my hands. How close? Close enough that this place's tax parcel has been opened on 2 different terminals in 2 days, she said. He wants us out tonight. The word tonight landed with the weight of cross-country miles. Lila's eyes moved from her mother to me. We're leaving. There was no drama, just an adjustment of parameters. We are, I said. We'll pack the things that make sense. Rachel's gaze softened. He asked me to bring a route, she added, not roads. We moved. The cabin had never been ours in the way houses are, so it was easy to touch only what we had brought, a few clothes, Copper the field guide. The drive's cash split into pockets that did not look like pockets. I left the beds made, but not quite neat. A book face down as if we would be back after coffee. Lila helped without questions, rolling her scarf and sliding it into the pack with the efficiency of a small soldier. At the last light, Rachel spread a hand-drawn map over the table. This line, she said, tracing a narrow path through contour lines like ribs, follows game trails and old logging cuts. It skirts 3 properties that have gates, which means cameras even up here. We cross a stream at a wide bend. The water hides prints. 4.5 hours to a place where a person who owes a favor will meet us. Lila, I said. I can walk, she answered, and I can be carried when I'm done walking. Rachel smiled, brief and honest. You always could. We left when the trees finished telling the light to go. I brought the rifle because Daniel's father had taught me that carrying responsibility is easier if it has weight. Rachel took point with a red-filtered headlamp that made the world less obvious and more readable. Lila went between us, Copper buckled across her small chest with 2 loops of scarf. The woods accepted us. Owls stitched the dark with soft calls. Once a deer startled and made a sound like a man catching his breath. We froze and let it decide we weren't trouble. The path was more suggestion than fact, but Rachel read what the ground offered: a scuff here, a moss patch, left darker by older boots, a gap where trees kept a memory of an old road. After 2 hours, Lila's steps shortened without complaint. We stopped at the stream. It ran wide and slow under a skin of dislodged starlight. Rachel squatted tested stones and led us across on 3 that did not wobble. On the far bank, we stood long enough for the water to erase what we had made. Rest, I said, and sat on a cold log. Lila folded against me, warm and determined. Rachel pulled from her pack a piece of chocolate wrapped in wax paper and broke it with the care of a ritual. We let it melt more than we chewed. The night held. Why now, I asked when Lila's breathing deepened against my shoulder. Rachel adjusted her glove. Because the story landed and because the wrong people read it as coordinates, she said. He's moved twice in as many days. He's safe for the hour that stretches in front of him. He wants us to close the distance. We walked again. Past midnight, the trail pinched between rock and swamp, the kind of place that refuses your presence. Rachel slowed and put up a hand. A shape separated itself from the dark and became a woman in a knit cap and soft-soled boots, standing with the economy of someone trained to be smaller than her shadow. Diane, I said, the name arriving before sense could explain it. She smiled in a way that admitted history and did not apologize. Hello, Miriam. She looked to Rachel. You made good time. Rachel nodded. Maps don't change just because people want them to, she said. Lila surprisingly didn't reach for me. Are you the helper? She asked, straightforward. I am, Diane said. You must be Lila. And Copper. She touched the fox's stitched spine with a fingertip that knew secrets. We'll be moving a short while longer. She led without fuss. The trail, if it had ever been one, dissolved into association, a pair of birches that grew as if practicing a waltz, a boulder that kept one face clean of lichen, as if it were saving it for photographs, a shallow cut where water knew to run when it had something to say. Diane didn't point. She didn't lecture. She just chose. And the choosing made sense even when I couldn't see the reason. The border wasn't a fence. It was a line that cartographers agreed on and trees ignored. Diane pointed to a low stack of stones in a pattern natural enough to fool anyone not looking for pattern. Here, she said, step shallow. We stepped. The air felt the same. The pines did not change dialect, but I felt something loosen in my chest that had kept format these last days. It wasn't safety, it was an acknowledgement that time had just been purchased. 10 minutes, Diane said. There's a road that pretends not to be one. The road took us, and a vehicle waited where it bent around a stand of poplar, dark boxy engine quieted but warm. A man in his 50s leaned one hip against the fender, watchful, without menace. Marcus, Diane said by way of introduction. He opened the rear door and offered his hand to Lila, as if she were being asked to step onto a stage she had asked for. Inside the heater breathed a kindness that didn't make us sleepy, because nobody allowed it to. Diane took the front seat, Marcus the wheel, Rachel beside Lila, me on the other side. We didn't ask where exactly. The shape of it was enough north and east through places that kept their lights low because stars are free. Lila watched out the window like a child cataloging a new museum. Rachel dozed for 6 minutes and woke herself with a jerk that admitted how long it had been since sleep had let down all its guards. I counted the small decisions that had accumulated into this moment and let the count wash back out. Diane called in a direction of travel that was more numbers than words, and somebody somewhere said a number back that matched. We stopped twice, once for a bathroom in a service station that sold coffee, strenuously once, to switch vehicles in a parking lot where a van waited that looked like a van. The second driver wore a knit cap pulled low and the kind of jacket that doesn't crinkle. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't need to. Dawn opened the sky at the edges first. Cities made themselves known by their perimeter stores, their churches, their last chance billboards. Montreal rose with the agreeable confidence of a place that has practiced its winters. We did not enter it. The van slid past and out again up into woods that insisted they were still woods, even as houses spaced themselves along gravel. The road to the house was narrow and sensible. The house itself was larger than the cabin and narrower than comfort would have liked, built of logs, stained a dark that drank the light and gave it back where windows insisted. Smoke meant a fire that had been kept for us, not lit, because someone heard tires. The door opened as we climbed the steps. Daniel filled the frame the way sons do when they have become men and forgotten how to be small. He had a beard because he needed to, not because he thought it improved him. The first sound Lila made was not a word. It was the noise a body makes when something it believed in appears. He knelt for the force of her. Rachel's hand went to her mouth and then dropped because this was not a moment to hide your face from. I let my hands be useless for once. When he lifted his eyes, they were the eyes of the boy who had once come home with a library book late and confessed before I asked. He stood and folded me in, and for a second my cheeks were against the coat I had buttoned for 20 years in different sizes. He smelled like wood smoke and effort. You did it, he said into my hair. We did the pieces, I answered. Nora carried the ones we couldn't. He brought us inside to a room that took the measure of us, without prying. Blankets waited on a couch. A pot hung over a small flame and admitted that somebody had taken time. Copper sat on the mantel for exactly 20 seconds before Lila reclaimed him. Diane leaned against a door jamb with the posture of someone who had trained her back to lie. Thank you, Daniel said to her. Your math held, she replied, a private acknowledgement that also accepted the presence of witnesses. So did your mother's. We ate not because we were hungry, but because food is a way to seat an hour. Lila told Daniel about the birds with the matter-of-fact detail of a scientist. He told her about a fox he'd seen at dawn that didn't mind being seen. Rachel's voice softened by degrees you could count if you cared to count. We let the room be enough. Later, at a table that had known plans and maps and breakfasts, Daniel unrolled the rest of what he had set in motion. He didn't make it drama. He began at the beginning his hands could hold. There are names you haven't read in the files, he said quietly, looking at all of us, and at none of us. The visible ones will answer first. Others sit behind contracts, behind foundations, behind 4 degrees of separation that someone designed to look honest. Nora's story opens the door. Federal warrants pry. A consortium elsewhere has started to pull in the other direction. Diane added what context needed adding. The people with the most to lose aren't patient, she said. They use pressure before they use cleverness. They tried your apartment, they checked property records. They will look for patterns in travel purchases, relatives who cannot keep their mouths closed because they have never needed to. Rachel didn't flinch. We're here, she said. We're together. Daniel laid a thin folder on the table. Inside were documents with our names misspelled on purpose, then corrected, then replaced by other names entirely. Passports that had a little too much life to be brand new. Photographs taken in good light that didn't flatter or apologize. We go far, he said simply. New Zealand, English, schools that don't ask for applause, a place where a fox in a window won't mean anything. The clarity of it closed a door quietly in my chest. I nodded because saying yes out loud costs something you sometimes need to save. For how long, I asked, because someone had to ask. 2 years, he said, the number honest and not large enough to frighten the room into stillness. Long enough for the work to complete what it can complete. What about you, I asked. I come with you, he said, unadorned. I can do what needs doing from there. The people who need to know how to reach me without reaching me. Diane set a small case on the table and clicked it open. Inside a phone that had already given up any pretense of being friendly, a sheaf of printed pages with instructions written like recipes, a map with its edges scotch-taped from use. I'll see you through the crossing, she said. After that, others take their places. You'll have names that can breathe. Use them. We did not toast. We did not promise. We packed what we had not unpacked. Lila put Copper into a small backpack with his ears tucked down as if he might catch wind and decide to fly. Rachel washed a mug and put it back where she had found it. Daniel stood for a long second at the window and then turned away. When the time fit the map, Marcus led us to the vehicle that would begin the next length. The cold had sharpened. The trees here wore it like a choice rather than a punishment. I took one last look at the room where we had expanded and contracted over these hours, the room that had held our reunion without cracking. At the threshold, Daniel touched my sleeve. I meant what I wrote, he said, voice low. I trusted you because you taught me to be trustworthy. I taught you to return library books, I said, because the truth sometimes asked to be carried by a smaller sentence. He smiled the way he smiled when he was 8 and had felt the shape of a thing that mattered. He took Lila's hand. Rachel took his other. I shouldered the bag that weighed what a life weighs when you have made it small enough to carry. We stepped into air that made a sound against your teeth. The road waited. The car door opened. The engine made its agreement. Diane looked at me for the length of a breath and then at Daniel for the same length. She touched the roof of the car as if anointing a ship. Marcus pulled away. The house that had been a pause became trees, then a turn, then something behind us. The map on my lap showed ocean where we were going, mountains, like folded paper, a river that refused to run straight. Lila leaned into Daniel. Copper's ears stuck up like punctuation that refuses to be quieted. My hand settled on my knees and stayed. The line we were drawing no longer cared what the old lines had meant. It crossed them, accepted them when they were useful, ignored them when they were not. The world ahead had room in it. We occupied our seats. The car made its steady remark on the road. The woods thinned. The sky opened. We did not look back again. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.